Imagine a king so wise and powerful that his fame crossed continents, being recognized not only for the splendor of his kingdom, but for the incomparable intelligence with which he ruled. A man whose wisdom was sought after by kings and queens from distant lands, whose wealth transcended the imaginable, and whose glory seemed untouchable. This man was Solomon, the son of the legendary King David. However, Solomon did not inherit just a majestic throne. He also received a legacy loaded with conflicts, sins, and divine promises. His father, David, had been a warrior of God, a king after the Lord's own heart, but also a man marked by mistakes, passions, and consequences that would echo through generations. David's greatness did not erase his failures, and Solomon carried in his blood both the blessing and the burden of that past. But how did an inexperienced young man become the greatest king of Israel? How did a simple request not only transform his life, but place him among the most legendary men in history? Solomon's journey was not only one of ascent, but of trials that would test his character, his faith, and his ability to stay true to the purpose granted to him. The fate of that king was not only in his hands, but in his choices. And as we'll see, not even the world's most extraordinary wisdom is enough when the heart turns away from the true path. Solomon's story begins even before his birth, amidst the triumphs and turbulence of his father David's reign. A fearless leader, David had unified Israel, defeated giants, and conquered territories. But his journey was not without flaws. His forbidden romance with Bathsheba not only dishonored his position, but triggered a series of tragedies within the palace. The death of their first child, the murder between brothers, and internal rebellions stained the final years of his reign, leaving a divided kingdom and uncertain succession. In his last days, weakened by age and the battles of his soul, David faced one of the most critical moments of his history, the dispute for the throne. Adonijah, his oldest living son, full of ambition, did not wait for his father's decision. Surrounded by influential generals and priests who supported him, he declared himself king in an attempt to seize power by force, disregarding God's will. But the destiny of Israel was not in Adonijah's hands. The prophet Nathan, aware of the divine promise, joined Queen Bathsheba to warn David about the imminent threat. In the urgency of the situation, the old king made a decisive decision. He ordered that Solomon be anointed king immediately, in a public ceremony that dispelled any doubt about the true succession. Adonijah saw his plans crumble before God's irrevocable choice. And so, still young and inexperienced, Solomon ascended to the throne of Israel. The weight of the crown rested on his head, bringing not only wealth and glory, but also immense challenges and grand expectations. Amidst the uncertainty of the future, he turned to the one who had chosen him. And it was at this moment that he made a request to God that would change his life forever. In the solitude of his young soul, newly crowned and aware of the immense challenge ahead, Solomon went to sleep with an uneasy heart. Governing Israel would not just be a matter of power and authority, but of discernment, justice, and faithfulness to God. And then, on that remarkable night, something extraordinary happened. God appeared to Solomon in a dream and made an unimaginable offer. Ask for whatever you want, and I will give it to you. Imagine the weight of this question. Before him, the chance to change his history and define the course of his reign. He could have asked for immeasurable riches, the defeat of his enemies, a long and prosperous life. Any other king would have put his own interests first. But Solomon did something that surprised even the heavens. With humility, he acknowledged his inexperience and asked only for wisdom to govern the people with justice. He understood that no fortune, no army, and no conquest would have value if he didn't know how to lead Israel down the right path. This request deeply touched God's heart. The divine response was beyond what Solomon could have imagined. Because you did not ask for long life, nor riches, nor the death of your enemies, but for wisdom to govern with justice, I will give you a wise and discerning heart, such as no one has had before you, nor will anyone have after you. And not only that, as a reward for his humility and for putting justice above selfishness, God also granted him unprecedented riches, honor, and glory. As long as he remained faithful to the Lord, his kingdom would be prosperous like no other in history. At that moment, a new era was born in Israel, the golden age of Solomon. But along with the blessing came the great test of his life. Would he remain on the path he had chosen that night? Solomon's reign had barely begun, and already he was presented with a case that would put his wisdom to the test before all the people. It wasn't a dispute between nations nor a military battle. It was something far more delicate: the life of a newborn and the love of a mother. Two women were brought before the king. Both claimed to be the mother of a baby, and there were no witnesses to confirm the truth. The case was a complete impasse, with no evidence or concrete proof. But Solomon, endowed with the wisdom granted by God, needed nothing more than what was already before him. Then, the king did something unthinkable. He ordered that a sword be brought and declared coldly, "Cut the child in half and give half to each of them." The royal hall fell into absolute silence. Shock swept over the room. The innocent life of that baby was about to be taken. But Solomon knew exactly what he was doing. It was then that the truth emerged. One of the women cried out desperately, "No! Please don't kill the child! Give her to her, but let him live!" Meanwhile, the other, unperturbed, accepted the cruel fate without hesitation. Solomon's judgment had reached its peak. With a firm gaze, he pointed to the woman who was crying and declared, "This is the true mother. Give the baby to her." At that moment, a sigh of relief spread through the room. The people were amazed, realizing that the king's wisdom did not only come from human intelligence, but from a deep understanding of the human heart granted by God. This judgment not only proved the greatness of Solomon's wisdom, but also solidified his reputation as the wisest ruler to ever exist. And this was just the first of many decisions that would make his name transcend the centuries. Solomon's wisdom was not limited to complex judgments. He transcended the challenges of the courtroom and delved deeply into knowledge, dedicating himself to writing, philosophy, and reflecting on existence. His intellect encompassed everything from the mysteries of life to the laws of justice and morality, and his words became timeless. As the years passed, Solomon became not only a king, but a master of wisdom. He composed over 3,000 proverbs and 1,000 songs, teaching about justice, prudence, the fear of God, and the fleeting nature of human life. His writings, preserved in the books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs, are still studied and quoted today. In his reflections, he warned about the vanity of material possessions, emphasizing that without God, everything was useless and fleeting. But Solomon's fame was not confined to Israel. His wisdom echoed beyond the borders of the kingdom, crossing deserts and oceans, reaching the ears of kings and rulers from distant lands. Many traveled long distances just to hear him speak and learn from him. And among all those who sought him out, one figure stood out: the Queen of Sheba. This powerful monarch, fascinated by the reports about Solomon, decided to test him with complex questions and riddles. She traveled a long and arduous path, bringing with her a caravan laden with spices, gold, and precious stones. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, she was received with great hospitality and presented her challenges to the king. To his surprise, Solomon answered each question with precision and depth, but it was not just his intelligence that impressed the queen. As she gazed at his palace, the organization of his kingdom, the wealth flowing through Israel, and the fair and wise way he ruled, she was astonished. Then, before his court, the Queen of Sheba declared, "Everything I heard about your wisdom and prosperity was true, but now I see that they didn't even tell me half of it. Your knowledge and greatness far exceed the fame that reached me. Blessed be your God, who placed you on the throne to reign with justice and wisdom." With this, the legend of Solomon was solidified in the imagination of the nations, and his name became an eternal symbol of wisdom, power, and greatness. But the glory, as great as it was, still depended on his faithfulness to the God who had given him everything. And it was at this point that destiny began to shift. At the height of his reign, Solomon experienced an era of unparalleled prosperity and peace. The kingdom of Israel flourished under his leadership, and the people lived in safety without the external threats that had once plagued the land. He built the magnificent Temple of Jerusalem, a religious masterpiece dedicated to the Lord, made with pure gold, precious stones, and imported cedar wood. The temple was not only a place of worship, but also a symbol of his wisdom and the glory of his reign. Israel seemed to be the chosen people of God, and everything seemed aligned to ensure a prosperous and unparalleled future. However, Solomon's great blessings came with equally great challenges. Challenges the king did not foresee. As his fame spread, Solomon began making alliances with other kingdoms, especially through strategic marriages. He married hundreds of women, many of whom were foreign princesses from pagan and idolatrous kingdoms. These alliances, which initially seemed like an intelligent way to secure peace and stability for Israel, ended up having devastating consequences. Solomon's wives brought with them their beliefs and religious practices, introducing idolatry into the heart of the kingdom of Israel. Over time, Solomon's heart began to stray from the God of his ancestors, and he allowed the construction of altars to other gods, permitting pagan beliefs to infiltrate the very temple of Jerusalem, which was inconceivable for any king faithful to God. Solomon, the wisest man in the world, made the mistake he himself had warned about in his Proverbs. He turned away from the fear of the Lord, believing that his wisdom and riches would be enough to maintain balance. However, wisdom without obedience to God is not enough, and this failure would have repercussions that would echo for generations. God, in his justice, announced that the kingdom of Israel would be divided after Solomon's death, a direct consequence of his unfaithfulness. Solomon, who began his reign with a pure heart and devotion to God, now saw his empire on the brink of collapse, divided because of his own choices. The man who had been an example of wisdom and prosperity was now surrounded by regrets, and the mistakes of his past began to cast shadows over what had seemed like a perfect life. Solomon's reign, once marked by glory and greatness, now became an eternal warning to all who seek power and success. Faithfulness to God is the only solid foundation for any empire, and without him, even the greatest kingdoms can crumble. In the final years of his life, Solomon began to look back and reflect deeply on all that he had accomplished. He who had been a king with unparalleled wisdom, immeasurable wealth, and a prosperous empire, began to question the real value of all of it. In Ecclesiastes, the book he wrote during this period of introspection, Solomon exposes his view on the futility of seeking worldly pleasures and the transient nature of everything in life. He saw that, despite all his achievements, everything was vanity, empty and meaningless unless rooted in the fear of God. In one of his most powerful teachings, Solomon warned that the true meaning of life is not in accumulating riches, power, or prestige, but in living a life of fear of God and obedience to His commandments. He realized that everything sought under the sun without proper reverence for the Creator is fleeting, like a mist that disappears at dawn. For him, the value of a life is not measured by what one achieves or accumulates, but by how much one honors God in all the choices made. This final reflection of Solomon is indeed an urgent call for all of us, an invitation to ponder what truly matters in our own lives. His story teaches us a painful lesson. Wisdom without obedience is not enough. We may possess intelligence, wealth, influence, and a life full of external accomplishments, but if we lose focus on God, everything can crumble. In the end, what remains are not riches or power, but the relationship with the Creator and faithfulness to Him. Now I ask you, what would you do if you had the chance to ask God for anything? Would you ask for riches to accumulate more for yourself, or wisdom to live according to His will? Would you ask for power to rule or purpose to serve? Solomon made the right choice at the beginning of his journey when he asked for wisdom to govern. But over time, his choices began to turn his heart away from God, and that altered the course of his destiny. The story of Solomon serves as a deep reflection on our own choices, reminding us that in the end, what truly matters is what we do with the gift of life and how we live in alignment with the divine purpose. May we, in our daily choices, seek not only success, but true wisdom, the kind that comes from God and leads us to the understanding that without Him, nothing has real meaning.